to Deep Sleep Stories. Thank you to everyone who's been listening. If these stories help you relax or fall asleep, a short review, comment, or sharing the podcast with someone who might benefit is a simple and meaningful way to support the show so that we may continue to offer it for free. Now, take a slow, gentle breath and let's begin tonight's story.
Welcome to Deep Sleep Stories, where you can let the day loosen its grip and drift toward rest. Tonight you'll be carried into a quiet seaside town and a lantern-lit workshop where an umbrella maker keeps a gentle secret stitched into silk and rain. You are here now exactly as you are, and there is nothing you need to solve, nothing you need to plan. Let your shoulders soften as if they have been waiting all day for permission. Let your jaw unclench, your brow smooth, your hands rest where they fall most naturally. Take a slow breath in as though you are drawing in warm air from a place that loves you back, and then let it out, unhurried, like a tide pulling away from shore. Again, breathe in and out. Notice how the exhale can be a little longer than the inhale, and how that small change tells your body it is safe to release. Imagine a gentle evening settling around you the way a blanket settles, not heavy, not tight, simply present. Outside your mind's window, there is a faint sound of water somewhere. Maybe a fountain, maybe distant rain, maybe only the memory of rain. And the air has that clean, softened feeling that comes after a shower. If thoughts arrive, let them be like passing clouds. You don't have to push them away. You can watch them drift and return to your breathing whenever you wish. And when you're ready, without effort, allow the scene to form, soft-edged, dreamy, like a watercolor that doesn't need sharp lines to be true. In a coastal town that wore the weather like a favorite shawl, evening came slowly. The roofs were tiled in mossy slate, and the narrow streets curled between stone cottages as if they had been drawn by a wandering hand. Salt air moved through everything, polishing window panes, softening old paint, and making the lamplight glow as though it were honey. The town's name was rarely spoken beyond its own harbor, not because it was forgotten, but because it seemed to belong to itself. Fisherfolk rose before dawn and returned with baskets that glimmered silver and blue. Gardeners tended small plots tucked behind low walls where herbs spilled their scents into the air, and when rain arrived, as it often did, it was welcomed like a visitor with good manners. Rain in this town was not a storm to dread. It came in whispered curtains and feathered drizzles and pearl-bright beads that clung to eaves and slid down glass in slow, thoughtful paths. The town had learned long ago to listen to it. The rain spoke to the gutters and the cobblestones, to the seagrass along the dunes, to the wind chimes in the courtyards. On the crooked street nearest the harbor, where the smell of seaweed and baked bread mingled in the evening air, there stood a small shop with a sign carved from pale wood. It read, in careful letters, "Umbrellas repaired and made by hand." In the window, umbrellas rested like sleeping flowers. There were deep navy ones ones with handles polished smooth as river stones. There were pale cream ones, their fabric dotted with tiny stitched stars. Some were folded, tied with ribbon, and some were open, angled so their canopies caught the lamplight and held it in gentle curves. Behind the glass, the shop was warm. A little bell chimed when the door opened, and it always sounded as though it had been tuned to kindness. The air inside held the quiet perfume of waxed wood, damp wool, and the faint sweetness of tea leaves. The umbrella maker's name was Lyndon. Lyndon was neither tall nor small in a way that mattered. Their hair was always slightly tousled, as if it had been brushed by the same breeze that wandered in from the sea. Their hands were the sort that spoke of patience, fingertips stained faintly with dye, palms marked by years of holding needles and smoothing fabric, and a calm steadiness in every motion. Each evening, as the town's lamps bloomed into light one by one, Lyndon lit a lantern in the shop and set a kettle on the little stove. The kettle's soft song made a rhythm that matched the needle's gentle pull through cloth. Stitch by stitch, Lyndon worked, and the world outside slowed to the pace of thread. Those who came to the shop did not always arrive seeking an umbrella. Sometimes they came for the warmth. Sometimes they came for the scent of tea. Sometimes they came because the world felt large and loud, and the shop felt like a place where everything small and careful still mattered. Lyndon welcomed them all, never with urgency, never with questions that demanded an answer. If someone brought a broken umbrella, Lyndon examined it as though it were a small creature that had been caught in trouble. If someone brought a story, Lyndon listened, as if it were a precious thing being set gently on the counter. And yet, though the shop was open and Lyndon was known, there was a secret that drifted through town like mist. It was not a sharp or frightening secret. It was the kind of secret that made people smile without knowing why. The kind that softened the edges of a rainy day. People would say, in murmurs, that Lyndon's umbrellas were different. Not in any way that could be proved quickly or loudly. Not in any way that would demand attention. But different, still. Some claimed that under Lyndon's umbrellas, rain never felt cold. Others insisted the storms grew quieter, as if listening. A baker once swore that when she walked home beneath one of Lyndon's canopies, she could smell her grandmother's kitchen, even though her grandmother lived far away. A sailor told anyone who would listen that Lyndon's umbrella had guided him through fog so gently it felt like following a lullaby. Lyndon never corrected anyone. They never confirmed anything either. They only smiled, small and private, and continued to sew. On a night when the rain was especially delicate, more like a blessing than a weather, Lyndon sat at the work table with a length of pale green silk spread before them. It shimmered softly like moonlight resting on a leaf. Lyndon smoothed it with both hands, slow and reverent, and then reached for a spool of thread the color of warm stone. The shop was quiet. Outside, the street glistened. The harbor's distant bells marking the gentle sway of buoys, chimed a lullaby to the dark. Linden began to sew. Each stitch was small, even, and nearly invisible. The needle dipped, as steady as breathing. Linden's shoulders remained relaxed. Their face carried a mild concentration that looked almost like peace. As Linden stitched, a faint rustle moved through the shop, not from wind, not from footsteps, but from something more subtle. The umbrellas in the window seemed to shift in their resting places, not in a way that would startle, but as if they were settling more comfortably. The lantern flame leaned, then straightened, then leaned again, responding to a current that did not belong to the air. If someone had been watching closely, they might have noticed that the silk on the table held a soft glow near Linden's hands. Not bright, not shining. More like the way a seashell seems to hold light after sunset. Linden paused once to pour tea. The cup warmed their palms. They took a sip, eyes half-lidded, and listened. Rain whispered at the window. The kettle sighed. Somewhere, a cat padded over cobblestones and vanished into the night. Then Linden returned to the work. The umbrella being made was not for a customer whose name was written in the ledger. This umbrella was for someone who had not yet arrived. Linden made one every season, as faithfully as the sea made tides. They never hurried the making. They never forced the fabric to become what it was not. Instead, Linden listened to the town. They listened to the way people spoke when they thought no one else could hear. They listened to the hush behind a laugh, the longing behind a complaint, the hope tucked into a sigh. Not to gather secrets for their own sake, but to learn what kind of shelter the world needed. Because Linden understood something that was difficult to explain in ordinary words. An umbrella could be more than cloth and ribs and handle. It could be a small portable roof, a circle of safety, a way to carry your own weather, or perhaps, if you were lucky, a way to leave some of it behind. Long ago, when Linden was younger and the shop had been freshly painted, Linden had wandered along the beach after a storm. Seaweed lay in ribbons on the sand. Bits of driftwood were scattered like forgotten bookmarks. And among the debris, half buried, Linden found a broken umbrella. It was torn and twisted, its fabric shredded, its ribs bent into helpless angles. It looked like something the sea had tried to swallow and then decided to return. Linden crouched beside it. They touched the splintered handle, and a strange feeling rose in their chest. A soft ache, like hearing a song you don't quite remember. They carried it home that night while the town slept and the waves smoothed the shoreline again. Linden placed the broken umbrella on the work table. They began to repair it, though they did not know why. The fabric was beyond saving, but the frame could be coaxed back into shape. As Linden worked, they felt more than heard a presence in the room. Not a ghost, not a threat. A sense of something curious and patient, watching the needle and the thread. Linden spoke softly, as one might speak to a shy animal. "If you belong to someone," Linden murmured, I'll help you find your way back." The lantern flame flickered, and then, in the quiet, the broken umbrella gave a sound that was almost like a sigh. From that moment, Lyndon's work changed. It became more attentive, more tender, as if each umbrella carried a possibility beyond its shape. Lyndon began to notice how certain fabrics responded to certain moods, how a handle carved from ash wood felt steady and grounding, while one made from polished cherry felt warm and encouraging. How thread, when chosen carefully, could hold a memory the way a shell holds the sound of the sea. Lyndon didn't talk about this. Some things they knew grew best in silence. So the secret stayed in the shop, folded into canopies and hidden beneath seams. It drifted into the town not as a proclamation, but as a feeling. The feeling that rainy days could be gentle and that shelter could be carried lightly. Seasons passed in the way they did by the sea. Foggy springs, bright summers, windswept autumns, and winters full of soft gray skies. The shop endured warm and steady like a lantern that never quite went out. And then, one evening, a traveler arrived. The traveler's name was Mara. She came into town at the hour when the last light was leaving the clouds and the first lamps were waking. Her cloak was damp at the hem, and her boots left dark prints on the stone. She paused at the corner where the harbor road met the narrow street, and she looked around as if she had stepped into a place from a remembered dream. Mara was tired, but not in the sharp, painful way of exhaustion. Her tiredness was like a long-held breath. She'd been walking for days, following the coast, staying in small inns, sleeping under eaves when the rain was too steady to go on. She had a satchel with a few belongings, and she carried, folded under one arm, an umbrella that did not open properly. Its canopy was still intact, but one of the ribs had snapped, and the whole thing leaned to one side like a weary shoulder. Mara found an inn, left her satchel in a small room that smelled of clean linens and old wood, and then wandered back out into the evening. The rain had become a mist, and the mist made every streetlight blur into a soft halo. She walked without urgency, led by nothing more than curiosity and the quiet pull of warmth. That was how she came to Lyndon's shop. The window drew her in first. The umbrellas looked so calm, so quietly beautiful, that she stopped and stood under the awning across the street, watching. The lantern inside glowed like a hearth. The bell above the door waited, patient. Mara crossed the street. She stepped inside. The bell chimed. The sound seemed to settle in her chest like a small kindness. Lyndon looked up from the work table. Their expression was welcoming without being intrusive, as if they had been expecting Mara but had no need to say so. "Good evening," Lyndon said. Their voice was soft. "Come in out of the damp." Mara took a breath. The shop smelled like tea and beeswax and something faintly floral, as if dried petals were tucked into drawers. She felt her shoulders drop a fraction. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, though her tone suggested she already knew she wasn't a bother at all. "My umbrella, well, it's been through a lot." She held it out. Lyndon took it carefully, as if it were a small creature with an injured wing. They examined the rib, the hinge, the worn spots on the handle. "This one has traveled," Lyndon murmured. "It's done its best." Mara smiled tiredly. "It has. I've been walking along the coast. I don't know exactly where I'm going. I just needed to move." Lyndon nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Sometimes movement is the first kind of shelter." Mara blinked, and something in her softened further. She wasn't used to people speaking like that, like they could see the shape of her thoughts without shining a harsh light on them. Lyndon set the umbrella on the table. "I can repair this," they said. "It will take a little while. Would you like tea?" "Yes," Mara said, surprised by how quickly the answer arrived. Lyndon poured tea into a small cup and handed it across the counter. The cup was warm, and Mara wrapped her hands around it as if she had been cold for longer than she realized. She sat on a stool near the window while Lyndon worked. The rain outside continued its soft conversation with the street. Mara watched Lyndon's hands move, steady, sure, unhurried. The broken rib was removed, a new one selected, and the mechanism adjusted with tiny tools that gleamed in the lantern light. There was something almost hypnotic about it. Lyndon didn't rush to finish. They allowed the work to be calm. Mara sipped her tea. It tasted of chamomile and a hint of honey. The warmth spread through her, not only in her body but in her mind, loosening the tightness of travel. After a while, Mara spoke again, quietly. "Your shop feels different." Lyndon didn't look up right away. "Different how?" "Like it's listening," Mara said. She felt a little foolish as soon as she said it, but it was true. The shop had a presence, a stillness that felt alive. Lyndon smiled. "Perhaps it is." Mara watched the umbrellas in the window. One of them, a deep indigo one with tiny silver stitches, seemed to shimmer when she looked at it directly. She blinked, and the shimmer was gone. "I heard people talking at the inn," Mara said. "They said your umbrellas have a reputation." Lyndon's needle paused for a moment, then continued. "People like stories," Lyndon said gently. "On rainy nights, stories keep us warm." "And are the stories true?" Mara asked. Lyndon's hands slowed, then stopped. They set down the tool they were holding and looked at Mara fully. In the lantern light, Lyndon's eyes were a calm gray-green, like the sea when it was thinking. "Some truths don't enjoy being chased," Lyndon said. "They prefer to be invited." Mara felt that sentence settle in her like a stone dropped into still water, sending out quiet ripples. She didn't press further. Instead, she watched as Lyndon returned to the umbrella, finishing the repair with the same attentive care. When the umbrella was whole again, Lyndon tested it. It opened smoothly, the canopy spreading in a neat circle. Lyndon held it upright, turned it slightly, and listened, as if listening for a note that only they could hear. Then Lyndon nodded, satisfied. "Your umbrella is ready," Lyndon said, handing it to Mara. Mara took it. The handle felt warmer than it should, as if it had been resting in sunlight. The canopy looked the same as before, but somehow cleaner, as if it had been rinsed not only of dirt, but of discouragement. "How much do I owe you?" Mara asked, reaching for her coin purse. Lyndon waved the question away, not dismissively, but gently. "You can pay what feels right." Mara placed a few coins on the counter anyway. Lyndon accepted them with a nod. As Mara stood to leave, Lyndon spoke again. "It will rain more tonight," Lyndon said. "If you walk by the sea, the mist may thicken. Stay close to the lamps." Mara paused with her hand on the door. "Thank you," she said. She stepped outside, and the bell chimed behind her. The street was darker now, but the lamps glowed warmly, and the rain had returned in a fine, steady fall. Mara opened her umbrella. As the canopy spread above her, something changed, not in the world, but in her perception of it. The sound of rain softened, becoming a delicate patter instead of a relentless tapping. The air beneath the umbrella felt slightly warmer, as if the space had its own small weather. Mara walked toward the harbor. She could see the sea as a dark, breathing shape beyond the last row of cottages. The mist hovered above it, curling in slow ribbons. As she walked, she noticed something else. Under the umbrella, her thoughts were quieter, not gone, not erased, but gentler. Memories that usually arrived with sharp edges arrived with softness instead. She remembered a room from her childhood where her mother had brushed her hair while the rain tapped at the window. She remembered the smell of wet earth in spring. She remembered the feeling of being held, safe and unhurried. She hadn't realized how much she missed those feelings until they returned like this, unannounced. Mara slowed her pace. She walked as if she had all the time in the world. The harbor's bells chimed again, distant and calming. Near the edge of town, where the cobblestones gave way to a path of packed sand and shell fragments, Mara stopped. She looked out at the sea. The waves rolled in with their steady breath, and the mist made the horizon disappear. She felt as if she were standing at the edge of a story. And then, beneath the umbrella, she heard something. Not a voice exactly, not words, but a sound, like a far-off humming, the way wind sometimes hums through rigging. Mara tilted her head. The humming seemed to come from above her, from the canopy itself, as if the umbrella held a song. She closed her eyes. The song was not loud. It didn't demand attention. It drifted around her like the warmth of tea. It carried a feeling more than a melody, a feeling of being guided gently, of being sheltered, not only from rain, but from the sharpness of the world. Mara opened her eyes again, and the mist before her seemed to shift, revealing a faint line of lanterns along the coastal path. Lanterns she hadn't noticed before. Their light was pale and steady like moonlight caught in glass. She hadn't seen anyone place them there. They simply were. Mara took a step forward, then another, following the lanterns as they led along the curve of the shore. The rain continued, but under the umbrella it felt like a lullaby. The path was quiet. Seagrass brushed her boots. Somewhere in the mist, a seabird called once, then fell silent. As Mara walked, she realized she was not feeling the usual worry of travel, the questions of where she would sleep, what she would eat, whether she would regret leaving home. Under the umbrella, those worries loosened, like knots easing in warm water. The lanterns guided her toward a small cove tucked between two rocky outcrops. In calmer weather, it might have been ordinary, but tonight it felt secret. The water there was gentler, the waves smaller, the mist thicker, as if the cove were holding its breath. Mara stopped at the edge of the cove. The lanterns ended there, their light pooling on wet sand. She looked down and saw something half buried near her feet, an old umbrella handle worn smooth by time and salt. It looked like driftwood at first, but the curve of it was unmistakable. Mara crouched and brushed away sand. The handle was attached to a broken frame, rusted and twisted. The fabric was long gone. She felt a familiar ache in her chest, the same kind of ache she'd felt when she had seen abandoned things on her travels. A lost glove on a bench, a forgotten toy in a ditch. It was the ache of wondering who had needed it, and whether they had been all right. Mara held the broken umbrella frame up to the lantern light. It glinted faintly, and for a moment, she thought she saw tiny etched patterns along the metal ribs. Swirls like wind, dots like rain. She glanced back down the path toward town. The mist swallowed everything behind her. Only the nearest lantern still glowed. A thought came to her, quiet and certain. This is where the story began, she realized. Not her story, but the umbrella maker's. She didn't know how she knew. The knowledge simply rested inside her, calm as a stone on the seabed. Mara stood again. She held her repaired umbrella in one hand and the broken frame in the other. The rain continued, and the world felt hushed. She spoke softly, not to anyone she could see, but to the night itself. "I'll take this back," she whispered. "If it belongs to someone, I'll help it find its way." The lantern nearest her flickered, as if in response. Mara began to walk back toward town, carrying the broken frame carefully. The lanterns along the path seemed to brighten just slightly, their light more distinct now. The mist shifted in a way that made the way forward clear. When Mara reached the edge of town, the familiar street lamps took over, warm and golden. The houses were dark, most windows shuttered. The rain glowed where it fell through lamplight. She returned to Lyndon's shop. The window still glowed. The lantern inside still burned, steady. Mara pushed open the door. The bell chimed. Lyndon looked up, and for a moment their calm expression changed. It wasn't surprise exactly. It was recognition, the way someone looks at a long-lost song when they hear it again. Mara set the broken frame on the counter. "I found this," she said quietly, "at the cove." Lyndon's hands hovered above it, not touching yet, as if they were greeting it. Their eyes softened. "That's the one," Lyndon murmured. Mara waited. The shop felt even quieter than before, as if the umbrellas in the window were listening. Lyndon finally touched the broken frame. Their fingertips traced the rusted metal, the etched patterns, the worn handle. Their breath shuddered, barely. "I thought the sea had kept it," Lyndon said. "I thought it was gone for good." Mara swallowed. "What is it?" Lyndon's gaze lifted to Mara's face. "It was my first," Lyndon said. "The first umbrella I ever truly made." Mara felt a gentle chill, not from fear, but from the way certain truths feel larger than words. Lyndon moved slowly, as if careful not to startle the memory in the metal. "I found it after a storm," Lyndon continued. "It was broken, but it wasn't empty. It carried something, like a wish, like a small kindness that had gotten lost." Mara nodded. "I thought I heard something," she said. "A humming." Lyndon smiled, and in that smile was a quiet sadness and a quiet joy braided together. "Yes," Lyndon said, "they hum when they're meant for someone, when they're holding something that wants to be found." Mara looked at the repaired umbrella in her hand. "So, what's your secret?" she asked, her voice barely above the rain. Lyndon didn't answer right away. They poured a second cup of tea, then sat across from Mara at the small table near the stove. The lantern's light made the wood grain glow. The rain at the window was a soft percussion. Lyndon cradled their cup. "It isn't really my secret," they said. "It belongs to the umbrellas." Mara listened, her tiredness melting into the warmth. "In this town," Lyndon said, "rain is common, and so is longing. People miss things. They carry griefs that don't have names. They hold hopes that feel too tender to speak aloud. An umbrella is a small shelter, yes, but it can also be a small promise." Lyndon's voice was slow, like a story told at bedtime. "When I sew," they said, "I don't only sew fabric. I sew space, a little pocket of calm, a little circle where the world can soften." Mara's eyelids felt heavy, but her attention remained gentle. "Some people," Lyndon continued, "need to feel brave. Some need to feel forgiven. Some need to remember what it was like to be safe. The umbrellas listen. The rain listens too. And when the time is right, the umbrella offers what it can." Mara's fingers tightened slightly around her cup. "That's why it felt warmer," she whispered. "That's why the path, the lanterns." Lyndon nodded. "The umbrellas don't control the world," they said. "They don't change it in grand ways. They simply shift the feeling of it, the way a lullaby shifts a room. They make space for you to breathe." Mara sat very still, letting the words sink like stones into water, quietly, without splashing. Lyndon looked down at the broken frame again. "This one," they said, "was made with a wish to guide someone home. I never knew who. I only knew it mattered." Mara felt a slow warmth spread through her chest. "Maybe it guided me," she said, surprised by the tenderness in her own voice. "Or maybe it guided itself back to you." Lyndon's eyes shone faintly in the lantern light. "Perhaps both," they said. Outside, the rain eased. The sound softened further, becoming a gentle hush. Lyndon stood carrying the broken frame carefully to the work table. "Will you stay a little longer?" Lyndon asked Mara. "Not as payment, just as company?" Mara nodded. "I'd like that." Lyndon began to clean the old frame. The rust was brushed away with patient strokes. The hinges were coaxed, oiled, and tested. Lyndon's movements were slow enough to be soothing to watch. Mara sat by the stove, her teacup warming her palms. Her umbrella rested beside her chair, folded neatly like a sleeping bird. As Lyndon worked, the shop seemed to breathe. The lantern flame held steady. The umbrellas in the window looked like quiet guardians. And in the hush, Mara began to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not excitement, not urgency, but a simple sense of being exactly where she needed to be. The night deepened. The in-room waiting for her felt less like a temporary stop and more like a soft nest. The future, usually sharp with questions, became blurred at the edges like lamplight in mist. Lyndon, still working, spoke softly without turning. "If you don't know where you're going," Lyndon said, "that's all right. Some journeys aren't meant to be mapped. They're meant to be felt." Mara let those words settle over her like a warm shawl. She watched Lyndon's hands repair the old frame, stitch by stitch, movement by movement, as if time itself had slowed to match the rhythm of care. When the frame was finally straight again, Lyndon reached for a length of fabric from a drawer. It was pale green silk, shimmering like moonlight on leaves. Mara recognized it. "You were working on that when I first came in," she said. Lyndon nodded. "It was waiting," Lyndon said simply. They draped the silk over the frame, smoothing it, letting it fall into place as though the fabric already knew the shape it wanted to become. Then Lyndon began to sew, the same stone-colored thread slipping through cloth with quiet ease. Mara's breathing slowed as she watched. In and out, each breath matching the needle's gentle dip and rise. The rain outside became more distant, as if it had stepped back to give the room peace. The shop felt like the inside of a shell, holding warmth and hush. Slowly, Lyndon finished. The umbrella opened with a soft sigh, the canopy spreading into a pale green circle that caught the lantern light and turned it into something almost like dawn. Lyndon held it, listening. Then very gently the umbrella gave a faint humming sound, so soft it was nearly imagined. Lyndon's smile was small and content. "It remembers," they whispered. Mara's eyes felt heavy. A soft drowsiness wrapped around her, not sudden, not forcing, but inviting. Lyndon carried the new umbrella to the window and set it among the others. It looked as if it belonged there, as if it had always been part of the shop's quiet collection. Then Lyndon returned to Mara and poured a little more tea. "It's late," Lyndon said. "The inn will be warm, and you have your umbrella again." Mara stood slowly. She felt as though she had been rocked gently by the rhythm of the shop. She picked up her repaired umbrella and held it close. "Thank you," she said again, and this time the words felt deeper, like roots in soil. Lyndon nodded. "Walk slowly," they said. "Let the rain be your lullaby." Mara stepped outside. The bell chimed, soft as a good-night kiss. The street was quiet, the lamps glowing. The rain had become a whisper again, and Mara opened her umbrella. The canopy spread above her, and instantly the world softened. She walked back toward the inn, unhurried. Her boots made gentle sounds on wet stone. The air smelled clean and new. As she walked, her eyelids grew heavier. Her thoughts drifted like boats untied from docks. She felt the kind of tiredness that comes when the body finally believes it can rest. Behind her in the shop, Lyndon returned to the work table. The lantern continued to glow. The umbrellas waited in the window like sleeping flowers, their secrets folded into silk and thread. And somewhere between the rain and the sea, between the warm light of the shop and the quiet darkness of the town, the world held a little more softness than it had before. Now the story begins to slow like a tide turning toward stillness. The town's lamps blur into gentle halos. The rain becomes quieter, as if it too is settling down to sleep. Mara reaches the inn. She closes her umbrella, shakes off a few lingering drops, and climbs the wooden stairs. The hallway is dim and peaceful. The air smells of clean sheets and old pine. In her room, she sets the umbrella by the door where it can rest. She changes into something comfortable. She slips beneath the blankets, and the bed welcomes her with warmth. Outside, the rain continues its soft, steady song. Inside, the room is still. Mara's breathing becomes slow and even. The day slips away from her like a cloak, sliding from tired shoulders. In the shop down the street, Lyndon extinguishes the lantern at last. Darkness fills the room, but it is gentle darkness, full of quiet. The umbrellas in the window are only shapes now, calm and waiting. The sea breathes in the distance, the town sleeps. The rain whispers, and you can sleep too. Let your breath be easy. Let your body sink into comfort. Let the sounds around you become part of the night's lullaby. There is nothing to do, nowhere to go. Only rest, only softness. Good night, dear traveler. Sleep well.